When I first started out with a small lathe in my home workshop, I had trouble with everything really, but one of the things that I really had trouble with was parting off, or cutting off as I think it might be referred to in America. I'd read a few books and it all seemed so easy, but of course practice is not always theory, and in all probability, apart from rigidity problems, and I was probably going too fast and the feed was all wrong, and because all the materials I used largely came from scrap yards and things, no doubt the quality of some of the steel was such that it was never intended to be machined as such. So to cut a very long story short, a very difficult time. Somewhere along the line, and I don't remember, but somebody gave me a piece of 2 5/8 round bar stock, and in my memory, because we're going back, I don't know, 40 years maybe, I can't remember, but I do remember it was a brilliant bit of steel and a pleasure to machine. But of course, being me, the first thing I did was to put it in the four-jaw and kind of machine it square. Why did I do that? I've got absolutely no idea on the now, just don't know. You can see the vestiges of the sort of round bar on the edges. I never took it full down. Anyway, so that was past a day or 20, so that was good. I have a very vague memory of trying to part the bar to length, and clearly that resulted in a disaster. I don't clearly remember. So much work with a hacksaw and some subsequent machining in the four-jaw produced a piece of square stock with rounded edges to an indeterminate length. Now, I had read a book, or several books actually, that indicated that if one was having trouble parting off, one of the ways to reduce the problems was to use an inverted rear parting off tool. And having gone through all this trouble with this, what is still quite a weighty piece of steel, which will be nice and rigid, I thought, I'll make a rear parting off tool, which I duly did. And there's a blade. It's set to a slight angle, machined in a rebate, just a piece of plate to clamp it in place, and I'll show you in a second, and it just clamps onto the cross side of the lathe. Just to show, this parting blade has a slight, I didn't do it, it was already as bought, has a slight angle machined into the end. So I've machined a similar minor dovetail in the block, so that when this slides in you can't actually lift it out, it's semi-trapped. And I just use a piece of thin paper or card, not sure, over the blade, and under the piece of steel that traps the whole thing together. There it is, mounted on the lathe. The blade, the clamping plate, just use a rule to set the side square to the top side so that this is in the right place. And I have to say, probably because of the increased mass and not bothering about with top slides and all the rest of it, it actually it works very well. And with a longer blade, which I used to have somewhere, you could actually part off considering the size of the lathe, you could part off I think about 3-inch diameter was the most I ever did really, with reasonably good results. Just machined this part here that when you tighten it, the handle's always out of the way. You can either do that by machining this, or I think what I actually did is I put a washer under it and trimmed that. But anyway, worked very well, so that was good. I've not troubled to make this bar run too true, because the only purpose of this is to cut this off so that I can rechuck accurately and finish the eccentric. But the other purpose here is to demonstrate whether or not my rear tool post is capable of parting off a decent bit of stainless steel. A little bit of chatter. Oops. Success. Hooray. And then one day I was boring out some really quite small holes in something or other that I was making, and I thought what I could really do with here was a really small boring tool. And I suddenly had the idea that if from the chuck I drilled a hole in this piece of this block of steel and threaded it so that I could fit a Jacobs chuck in. Difficult to do this one-handed actually. Might have to. There you go. For very small work, I've got a boring bar holder. So back in those days, I obviously didn't have any money, I used to acquire quite a lot. I think it's called silver steel, not made of silver. I think it's got a high carbon content or something, and the bottom line is it was very amenable to heat treating, hardening and tempering, and I used to make D-bits and things for finishing holes. And then it occurred to me one day, if I was to put a slight angle on the end, and these come in various sizes, a D-bit could actually be a boring bar. So here is a homemade, abused and slightly bent D-bit with a rake on the end, fitted into the chuck. The tip is set at the lathe centre height, and angled slightly longitudinally to the bed of the lathe to make a useful small boring bar. And then one day, February 1991, according to the date that I put on this, which was a long time after I made this original tool holder, I was trying to turn something out of fairly long. I think I was probably doing a valve spindle or something, I don't know. And it wasn't working out very well because due to the very thin size of what I was trying to form on the end of something else, deflection became a real problem, and what I was getting was a taper. So of course what I really needed was some form of small steady to support the thin bar while I attempted to turn it. As a result, I came up with this, which is basically again a fairly substantial block of steel for what it is, and in this case it's got a piece of bronze bar in it. It's got a slight shape at the end. The hole was obviously something for a job I was doing, and I actually wanted the work to pass through that. Search me, can't remember. But actually this becomes a travelling steady. I hope you can see, I mean in this case I've got a small radius machined in the end of this piece of bronze, and you can do that by putting a milling cutter in the chuck and just running this along to cut a precise radius if that's what you want to do, but I find you don't have to be too precise with it. And then that just supports the end of the bar. Again, I'm struggling a little bit with not enough hands, but yeah, works alright. Just put a little bit of downward pressure on the tool when you rotate it to hold the bar in place. Anyway, got half a day with nothing to do, you can muck about. To use this travelling steady then, because this part can be swivelled and the bolt tightened, you can accommodate any reasonable size of bar that you want, but clearly you'd only use this for something very small. This is a bit of 3/32 steel, I think. And then by releasing these two bolts you can move the bronze steady part in and out again to accommodate whatever bar you're playing about with. So for example, come along, just get that out of the way. Oh god, this is hard, it's one-handed. Just come along. I've already moved the tool in to take a cut. I mean, I'm just messing about really. It's driving me mad. There you go. And so you bring this part down and fairly firmly attach it to the bar, and the slightly curved end on this nestles on the bar, and if we're very lucky I'll demonstrate that you can just take a cut along. This is just a demonstration, I'm not producing anything particular here. I mean, if you want a specific diameter at the end you'll have to play about a bit. But I hope you can see that it actually works fairly well. I don't use it much these days, and there are other ways of cutting small diameters from small diameters from bar. Joe Piezinski has got a YouTube channel, and he did a very good video on cutting very long, thin or small diameter rod. Very good video, so that's worth a look if you're into this sort of thing. So this is just a piece of 3/32 steel rod, 0.186 or 7 from memory in diameter, just for demonstration purposes. This end I've turned down is 88 thou in diameter, but it could have been anything we wanted, just a question of playing about and setting that rear steady up really to get what you want, and then just run it along. Of course, now in 2021, with the well established advent of affordable quick change tool posts and affordable boring bars with carbide inserts, probably this device is not as required as it might have been. The parting off tool, the rear parting off tool, is still very useful for larger diameters on a small lathe like the Myford, but the kind of boring, if you use the word, but the boring bar type of aspect probably not quite so required anymore, unless you want to make a really small one, of course, because these things, the shop bought jobs, the boring bars are quite big, so you can make a really small one, if that's what you find you need to do. And I have to admit, even over the years, the small travelling steady has had a bit of use, but not very much actually, because the number of times I've had to turn very, very tiny diameter on a stock has been very limited. Doesn't happen very much. I mean, it's useful when you need it, but it's had very limited use really. Just showing this boring attachment, cleaning up the as cast recess in the kind of boss of this, what will be the pulley for the Stuart beam engine that I'm making. I didn't completely film this bit, so you kind of have to trust me. But using this kind of boring attachment in this homemade tool post, and a homemade, I think actually it's a D-bit really, but I don't know really, homemade donkeys years ago, I don't know. I've actually used this very thin tool to just clean up the inner boss and the back face of this pulley casting for the Stuart beam engine. The reason I didn't film it is you don't want to be letting this tool go running too far, and I couldn't hold the camera whilst controlling the lead screw hand wheel, so just kind of trust me. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been of some slight interest, and more videos to come in the not too distant future, I hope.